Hello, friends. Greg Koukl here. Stand to Reason is the show, and this is the beginning of the last month of the year. Is that amazing? What are we, 3 weeks away from Christmas? That's scary. They used to say how many shopping days left till Christmas. Do they still do that? I don't like to think about that. We haven't really started, but we have started, but not much. Hopefully we'll get it done before we get too close to the end, so it's not all last minute. But I have another kind of shopping suggestion for you right now. As you know, and if you've been listening to the show for years or even for this year, I'm glad you're on board. I'm glad you listen. We love giving you what we're able to give you, such as it is. Not just me on this show, but me and Amy on the other show and the other guys with their podcasts and the website with all their stuff and the events that we do and the public speaking and all that. We give. And our rule at Stand to Reason, mine from the very beginning, is we never ask to receive until we've given. We give first. And we actually don't ask, or I don't ask to receive very often, except for December. And so I'm going to ask. And I realize that if your email is like mine, it's just been loaded up with all kinds of different appeals from lots of different organizations you may be involved with, and they're all, I suspect, great organizations, certainly the ones that send me emails, and we've sent a couple to you as well. But I just want to make a personal appeal because I don't get to do this very often. I don't want to do it very often. I want to just keep giving with the expectation that people will respond with giving back to Stand to Reason as they have received from us. But every once in a while, a little nudge is in order, and December is a great time to give that nudge. We have had an incredible year. We have more than 12,500 students in the last season that have attended our reality conferences. We have had more than 15,000 people register for 26 STRU courses. Now, that's the full registration, but we have increased the number of our university STRU learners by 50% this last year. We completed a new documentary, One Solitary Life. It's not out yet. You'll get that soon. Be available. We are working really hard. In fact, I was just thinking as I started this show, this is the 6th show I've done today, and I'm already kind of tired. But that's what we do. We just keep working, and we work for you on your behalf so that in some measure we can present you complete in Christ, strengthened and built up so that you can carry on. We pass the baton. This is largely a discipleship enterprise. What we do at Stand to Reason, we train Christians to carry on and to pass that baton to others as well. And so we're here for you. And once a year, one season a year, I ask for help because we've done great work this year. We have greater work we want to do next year. And all the things that I mentioned, one of the coolest things that we are now we're just launching, and so to speak, we're just beginning to experience the benefit of is having Craig Hazen on our team. He's the architect and director of Biola's wildly successful Masters in Apologetics program for the last 26 or 27 years. Before that, he was at Simon Greenleaf University with their program. That's where I took my MA, but he's now working for us. He's on our team, bringing all of his expertise with him to help us next year and subsequent years to just launch. And I feel we've been launching for the last 31 plus years. Every year is better than the one before it. And we're glad for that because we see the impact it is in people's lives. But we wouldn't be able to do any of this. Sounds trite, but it's true without you. We are a listener-supported, donor-supported organization. We sell some product, but that basically pays for the cost of goods and the staff who run that, and it's basically a zero-sum kind of game. It's whatever we make, we spend trying to make that money we make. So that's just a push there on the product side. Mostly we survive because we have wonderful people who give, some on a regular basis, and those are our wonderful strategic partners. And they're the backbone, but some people just give once a year. Some people give an end-of-year gift that's significant. Some don't give at all. So here's my challenge from me to you. That is, this December, please give aggressively for Stand to Reason's future. We got lots of things planned for next year. We want to expand even further than we have just this year, expanding, bringing Craig on, but we got lots more we want to do, and we need to fund it. And some of you are just giving the same every month. Great, keep that up. But how about this? Why don't you just, for 1 month, just double down? For the month of December, just double down. If you haven't given before at all, maybe this is the time to start giving. Maybe just for this month. Be generous to us so we can make our nut for this year and in the black and move forward aggressively for next year. Maybe you want to become a strategic partner and make it every single month. You go to str.org and follow the prompts. I can't tell you the exact spot, but it'll be easy to find if you want to donate. And we will make good use of your contribution. I promise you. We've been doing it for a long time. We got a good reputation doing that. And our money goes into our people largely because it's our people that are doing the work. And the work that benefits you and benefits so many others. And by the way, we have a wonderful group of donors who have pooled their pledges to amount to $325,000 this month as a challenge to you and our other friends to give generously collectively to equal or exceed their gift. And my basic point is if we've helped you and you believe in our critical ministry to equip Christian ambassadors, my request is simply, please consider a year-end gift right now. If you send that gift before the 28th of the month, we get it back, I'm going to send you a gift. It's a copy of Justin Brierley's book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Now, I read that last year. We had Justin on, did a show with him. You can find that in the archives. This is a pretty cool book because what he's looking at is the shift in the culture where lots of people who are very visible atheists are now giving theism, especially Christian theism, a second look and are turning around. Something is going on. God is doing something. He's doing something incredible in this area. I want you to read it, to be encouraged. And I thought it was, let me put it this way. Usually I read a book kind of cursorily to do the interview. And then I got to move on to the next book. This book, I came back to it and finished the whole thing, page 1 to the end, because it was that good, and I wanted to make sure I got it all. That's the book I want to give you. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Will send it as a thank you for your gift by the 28th of this month to Stand to Reason as your end of year gift. So there's my appeal and my thanks in advance for your kindness to us. I had a conversation the other day with someone who is preparing a study about 1 Samuel 17 and David and Goliath. Now, I don't want to go into a long thing on this. I did have a conversation with my staff about some of these points, but I'm just going to give you a quick summary of something that I want you to take away regarding that. And I have mentioned this before, but it bears repeating because I have newer listeners and some who've heard this before forget. Here's the first thing I want you to know about David and Goliath. It is not a Bible story. It is not a Bible story. Isn't that the way we usually put it? Oh, the story of David and Goliath. Oh, the story of Noah and the ark. Oh, the story of Moses and the Ten Commandments. Oh, the story of this, the story of that, the story of the other things. These aren't stories. This isn't Aesop's fables. These are accounts of events that actually took place. So if you're in the habit of characterizing these narratives in the Scripture, not just the Old Testament, but also the New Testament, the story of Jesus calming the storm, please abandon that language, because what it does is reinforce in people's minds that this is just a story. And generally, stories that are mere stories that are for our instruction, which we acknowledge that as part of the Bible, there's something there for us. start being treated kind of like Aesop's fables. Like, yeah, here's the story, but there's a moral. And the important thing about the story is the moral that it teaches. There's a moral at the end. And so then there's this temptation to treat the story like it's a metaphor for something else. And therefore, when people are teaching about the story of David and Goliath, how David beat the giant with God's help, the moral of the story is God is there to defeat the giants in your life. What are they? What are the giants you're facing right now? If the story is Jesus calming the storm, and I think people are more likely to understand that as something that really happened than the stories in the Old Testament, even so, the temptation is great to see what is the moral of that story, and they make a metaphor out of it because this is about Jesus calming storms. So what is the storm in your life that Jesus needs to calm? Okay, notice how we just switched from an historical account that actually happened and was recorded by the writer to communicate something in particular, and we've made it into a fable by calling it a story, and then we metaphorize it and try to ask, well, what is the lesson? What is the moral of the fable, so to speak? And I'm just saying that the purpose that the gospel writers included Jesus calming the storm was not to get us to reflect on the storms in our life that Jesus could calm for us. I know that because I read the account. And in the account, when Jesus calmed the storm, the disciples didn't say, gee, what are the other storms in our lives that Jesus might calm? No, they watched Jesus give a command to the forces of nature, which the forces of nature immediately responded to, and the storm stopped, and the wind stopped, and the gale stopped, and the boat was at the destination. In one case, it was a miracle. And their response was, who is this man that can command the forces of nature? What manner of human being is this? Well, he's no mere man, is the point. And their response subsequent is appropriate to what happened. They fell down and worshipped him. So the calming of the storm in the Gospels is about who Jesus was, not what Jesus can do for you. Now, the fact that Jesus is God and worthy of worship does have ramifications for all kinds of other things, but that isn't why the account is in the Gospels. And by the same token, the account of David and Goliath is about something else. David standing in the line of fire. He didn't invite this. It didn't come upon him. He's not attacked by Goliath. He stood up and went out. He invited the confrontation. Why? It's there in the text. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, David says, who would taunt the armies of the living God? The rest of the soldiers, including Saul, saw this as an assault against them. David saw it as an assault against the God of the armies of Israel. And that's why he went out. You can read the account, the conversation he has with Goliath and with his brothers and with Saul, and he takes the weapons he is familiar with, that he has learned to use, and he fights the champion from Gath and defeats him because God is on his side. So this isn't about us being overwhelmed by giants in our life of different sorts and that God's going to help us. This is really about standing up in the line of fire for the assault on God's character, which is what David did. And there are lots of different applications to this, one could imagine, but you have to start at the right place to make up proper application. You have to start with the right sense of the passage and the right meaning of the passage, and you don't make a metaphor out of it, because then you're missing the point. And I actually hadn't noticed this until yesterday when I was having this discussion with my friend, that in this particular case, I already mentioned this, but I'm just underscoring it, the giant didn't find David. David found the giant. David went out after that giant, after Goliath, the champion of Gath, who was raising his fist not just at the armies of Israel, but the armies of God himself. And that was a challenge David was going to rise to for the sake of the honor of God. And whatever application you make, if you don't make an application from that truth, then you're missing the point of the passage, or at least that aspect of the passage. There's a lot more going on there that I could talk about. You know, he didn't use the armor that was available, not because he didn't believe in armor, because later on when he grew up, he would fight with armor, but he had not tested them. He was going to work with what he knew he could use effectively. And then there was a partnership then between God's power, God working on his behalf, and his skill that he had developed with a slingshot and stones, as it turned out. But he'd used it in the past. He'd prevailed in the past. This is what he knew, and he was going to use that and trusted God to take care of it from there. There's more that could be said about that, but I just want to offer that thought. Okay, we're going to go to break then, and we'll come back and talk with Cade. Greg Koukl here on break. Stay with us. All right, back at you here on Stand to Reason, and we've got the man himself, Mr. Cade. Welcome to the show, Cade.
Hello, Mr. Koukl. It's good to talk to you again.
It is good to talk to you, too. And I see this is Colorado Springs, so you're still in the Springs. I thought maybe you're going to be going to Portland. But I talked to your grandma in Minneapolis, 3 weeks ago?
I believe that's about it, yeah.
Yeah, she says it was great talking to her, by the way. I had a lot of fun with her. I think this is the first time I met her. But missed all the rest of the clan. And she said that you were hung up there in Colorado Springs.
Yes. Unfortunately, it was the first time we weren't able to make it, so.
You haven't missed a reality for about 4 years, right?
I actually, since I started going at the age of 12, I haven't missed one. I think I've gone to 5 in a row.
Oh, yeah. And I also saw Danny. You know, Danny, I'm trying to remember his last name. You remember Danny from Fargo area. He was there asking about you. So anyway, so we missed you, but I'm glad you called.
Well, thank you, Mr. Koukl. It's been a while, so I'm glad to talk to you again.
Good. Me too, you. So what's up?
Well, so I will try to be as succinct as possible, Mr. Koukl, but my question has a little bit of explaining to do. So
all right.
So this semester for schoolwork, I took up a speech and debate club. And so throughout participating in that club, it's led to several interesting conversations with some of my teammates. And those conversations have revolved around the role of men and women in society.
Yeah.
And it was quite shocking to me, Mr. Koukl, because I was talking with some of my female teammates, and it just blew my socks off to hear some of them talk about, like, the ideas of, like, a male headship, because I thought that had been completely tabooed among most circles. But just to be very brief, it has got me to thinking about, it seems that there is a divide between men and women in our current culture. That there's almost like a war going on between the two sexes. That's definitely going on politically. But it just almost seems like they're two warring camps now, and it's very hard to have, at least for me, I find that people my age have a very difficult time having meaningful or hot topic conversations with people of the opposite sex. And I'm just wondering if you might have any thoughts on this, because it's kind of captured my attention, and I've also been studying things like feminism and then the reaction of toxic masculinity, as people like to call it.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing a cultural trend that men and women are becoming more and more divided, and that I think, and this culminates in transgenderism, that their roles are becoming the same more and more. That men and women are completely interchangeable, or the difference is even irrelevant. So I was wondering if you had any idea. Do you think I'm onto something here? Would you agree with this assessment? Would you have any thoughts to add?
Sure. Well, it's ironic that your observations, I think, are, somewhat accurate, but they're at odds with each other. Because on the one hand, you're saying that there is this polarization between men and women, at the same time that male and femaleness seem to be interchangeable, at least at some other level. And this is what the gender dysphoria is. There's a spectrum, and there's, and men are not men and women aren't men. They just kind of flowing back and forth. And I think what this demonstrates is how confused the culture is. And I want to be clear about something that you said. I wasn't sure I caught it right. Right at the beginning, were you saying that more and more people that you talk to are seeing men as being appropriately in a leadership role? Is that what you said at the beginning?
If you'll allow me, I'll just explain this a little more, if that's okay.
Sure.
So even in some of the conversations I have in Christian circles.
These are Christian circles, okay.
Yeah, these are Christian circles. It seems to bring up the idea that Adam had sort of like a responsibility over Eve, or that Paul talks about men being like the leader of their households or being leaders spiritually, that's a really unpopular view, even among Christians.
Yeah.
And I think it's both sexes have discomfort with that.
All right. Well, in a way, that doesn't surprise me because of the general cultural shift towards a certain sense of egalitarianism, that everybody's equal and no one's above anybody else. And of course, you got a theological drift in the church itself, where instead of complementarianism, that is, that the male complements the female, the husband complements the wife, even though there's a hierarchy of leadership. That's the biblical view, in my understanding of it. On the other hand, you have what's called egalitarian, where there's no leader. One's not a leader over the other, and they're both equal, and this then has ramifications for decision-making, marriage, and child-rearing, etc. So I'm not surprised entirely that it's drifting that way, because this is the way the culture is talking. At the same time, though, you have this other confusion. You have now shall we say, a reaction to the whole gender dysphoria, where women are allowed, I should say physical males are allowed to compete against physical females. All right. Well, this seems patently unfair to anybody who is moderately clear thinking about this, though some people who are carrying the torch for transgenderism are still campaigning that it's discriminatory to not let a woman compete against a woman when the woman they have in mind isn't a woman, but it's a man, in the ways that are relevant to competition as opposed to gender identity. And but there's a blowback on this, and we see it more and more, like the volleyball teams that are refuse to compete with other volleyball teams that have a man that is playing on the girls' team and gave a girl a concussion or whatever when he spiked the ball and hit her right in the head. And then, of course, you have the boxers during the Olympics and stuff like that. So there, it just seems to me there's massive confusion on this, and the confusion is because you have nature on the one hand, which is the way God made the world. You have the structure of reality, which means male and female, male body, female body, and all that goes with it. And regardless of how somebody identifies in terms of gender, it doesn't change the fact that human beings are binary when it comes to sex. There are males and there are females. I heard a funny little thing. It was a comedy routine. How do you know a male from a female? And the comedian said, well, one of them, if a baby pops out of you, you're a female, for example. He had a couple other funny quips, too, that had to do with cultural things. But that's like, duh, no, so obvious. So you have nature that is fixed and can't be changed. Sex change operations are impossible. You don't change somebody's sex. You can only mutilate their body. Okay? That's on the one hand. That's nature. Then you've got culture doing all its crazy things, and culture, especially a culture that is hostile to God. I'm just making a broad generalization. This culture is hostile to God. Every culture is hostile to God. Every man-made institution is, at its core, hostile to God. They do not want to bend the knee. And they cook up all these different kinds of things that turn out to be deceptions of the devil, alternate views of reality that aren't reality at all. They are denial of reality, and it creates all kinds of ridiculous outcomes. But they all amount to interfering with human flourishing. God made the world a certain way so that human beings would function according to the way that he made them. They would flourish. And we read about that in Genesis 1 and 2. Okay? Then we have a problem in Genesis 3, and now we got rebellion, and we got people trying to do things their own way instead of God's way, and they always make a mess out of it. And so I think both of the things are at work at the same time. You've got reality, and reality is something people cannot get away from, Cade. Reality has a way of injuring people who don't take it seriously, is the way I put it. Francis Schaeffer says everybody's made in the image of God, and they have to live in the world God made. There's no changing that. And those are going to have ramifications for our living. And what you've identified is just the craziness of the confusion when people are working hard to work against reality itself, the reality that God himself made, how he structured it. And so is there a war going on? Yeah, there's a war going on. It's going to be expressed in hostility between the sexes, but that's been perennial. That's like forever. It just takes on different manifestations in different periods of time. The fundamental facts remain the same. Men are different than women, and they are different for a reason. And when we function the way God intended us to function, and women for them, then humanity flourishes. And when we try to reverse definitions and deny the nature of reality, then we don't do well. So, I mean, that's just kind of my overall summary of the kind of thing that you're observing now, Cade.
Sure. If it's all right, Mr. Koukl, I would like to return for a second to the whole idea of like roles and how culture is viewing it as almost an interchangeable thing, if that's all right with you.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
What I've been interested to see, especially because for some other schoolwork, I've been having to read early feminists as well. And I remember being horrified when I heard one feminist, her last name's Firestone, say that in a new society that the first thing we must do is eliminate the tyranny of reproductive biology for women.
Yeah.
And almost saying that these natural order desires that seem to be in men and women, like men to protect, provide, you have sort of a responsibility over their family, and for women to nurture and care for children, things like that. And not saying those two things are exclusive, but that seems to be the general trend towards the opposite, towards the sexes. And it was interesting to me to find that as this sort of modernization of modernized view of gender continues to progress, it called these natural desires almost evil and like shackles.
Right. And tyranny is the language, which
exactly.
by the way, I understand the language because you're stuck with this thing and you can't get away from it, but it's the nature of reality. It isn't someone being tyrannous over someone else. It's the way things are. That's like talking about the tyranny of gravity. Man, I cannot believe the tyranny of gravity. Every time I step off the stoop, I go right to the bottom of the step. Holy cow, I want to float around. Man, the tyranny of gravity.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what it seems like. It's an affront on these things that for the longest time, well, I shouldn't say the longest time because we see it in Scripture that people would misuse their gender and their sex for evil purposes.
Right.
But that when we are, I would say, in a moment of enlightenment, we realize that these desires for men and women are good things. And so what I'm really intrigued about, and I'm wondering how important it is also to current cultural issues, is what happened to almost subvert this idea. Because I think a lot of people still think along these lines, but they're too afraid to speak it out.
Yeah.
Because if you're being called a misogynist or a sexist or a bigot or whatever. And what caused this sort of subversion of male and female desires, first of all, but then this idea to implant and then progress to say that they are completely interchangeable.
Yeah. Well, in my view, that's not progress at all. I mean, because it's a denial of reality. And whenever you deny reality, bad things happen. Like I said, reality has a way of injuring people who don't take it seriously. So, but that's, of course, that's why they use progressive, because they think they're going to progress to something better. And the progress that they are looking for is a denial of the particular way that God made the world, okay? And they're trying to get out from underneath that. And to me, that is just implicit rebellion against God. Now, if I were talking to a non-Christian audience, I would couch my language much differently. But, I'm talking to you, brother in Christ, and I'm talking largely to Christians. And I'm thinking we have insight into these things because we know the way the world is structured and why it's structured the way it is. And we know there's a battle going on that is between the world and God and God's ways, and that fanning into flame by the enemy, the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places, that is working to do the same thing, deceive people and take them captive. You see, the devil can't get at God, but he can get at God's image bearers. And this is what he's doing. And he's trying to make life miserable for God's image bearers, get them to believe a lie so that they experience the same fate that he will experience, judgment.
Okay. So considering that, Mr. Koukl, the final question I would like to pose to you then is, from a biblical worldview, how do the roles of men and women interact? How does maleness or I should say masculinity and femininity, how do those things coincide? And not just in marriage or the church, but just in general. Yeah. Because obviously God creates men and women for a reason. He could have created one asexual creature.
Yes, right.
The way to go about it was two complementary sexes.
Right.
So on a biblical worldview, how do these two interact? Because there's also a lot of stereotypes that go into it as well.
Yeah. I understand that. And so, like pink and blue is not the standard. Okay. I guess. By the way, it's a very fair question, and sometimes it's difficult to separate out the cultural elements, like pink and blue, for example, from the created elements. So the way I respond to this is I step back and I try to look at what is distinctive about men as men and women as women. Men are stronger than women. They have testosterone. They have bigger muscles. They are generally larger than women. They are more capable of physical exertion than women. Women have vaginas and they have uteruses and they produce children, and this puts them at a liability because when they're pregnant, they're more physically vulnerable. When they have small children, both the women and the children are physically vulnerable, okay? Now, these are just simple facts of nature for people who are not confused by progressive thinking, all right? This is pretty obvious. So God has made men and women different. In other words, human men are made to do the things that best take advantage of their physically unique characteristics, and women likewise, all right? So I don't think it's too far of a step to say that men are then to, as some people put it, hunter-gatherers. They're the ones who protect and provide for the women who are the nurturers and child rearers. And without both working together, you're not going to have civilization. In fact, this is part of the problem we have now, where the egalitarian element is in play aggressively. You have people that are thinking, well, we're all equal, and there's nothing about our relationship that implies child rearing, and therefore we won't have kids. And so now you've got the population levels plummeting in Europe and other places. They're not able to keep up with the population. Now, of course, that's the Caucasian population, because the Muslim population doesn't follow that ethic, and they're increasing massively by comparison. And there's all kinds of political cultural ramifications for this. But if I'm just trying to do an even-handed analysis, I say, look at men do what men do. They are strong. They go out and they protect. They hunt. They provide and they protect. Does that mean women can't protect? No. Does that mean women can't provide? No. It means that men are best suited for that, and women are best suited for, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, feathering the nest or caring for the offspring, and comforting and nurturing, okay? And by the way, even in, I mean, this is so obvious to me as a dad who is married to a woman, and we have children. Mom is consistently, and I think, and naturally acting in a very protective fashion. Where I'm protective of my daughters, but I want to push them out. I want them get out and be exposed to the danger, to learn how to cope with the danger and grow up and be adults. Now, my wife obviously wants my girls to be an adult, but there's just a different dynamic that's going on here. And I don't think that's a function of my cultural conditioning or my biblical conditioning. It's a culture of the nature of it's a result of the nature of reality. And I'm operating within that. Okay, so there is flexibility, of role flexibility, but there still is this foundational thing that's going on. And if we deny that, then culture doesn't, I should say that human beings don't flourish. They don't prosper. I remember seeing a Jack Reacher movie with, who's the guy, the Mission Impossible guy, the Scientology guy. Tom Cruise. Okay, Tom Cruise. So this is the Tom Cruise Jack Reacher version. There's two different versions of it. And Tom Cruise is being Jack Reacher. And there's a gal that's also his companion, and they're doing their thing, and they're both superhero types, and, and she's very masculine because the whole thing is competition. Who's tougher, which strikes me as odd. But anyway, they come into possession of a girl that's probably 7 years old, okay? They have to guard her and protect her. Now what? And what the Tom Cruise character does is he presumes the woman is going to take over that role. And when the character realizes that Tom Cruise character wants her to do that, she gets really angry, as if, he's imposing upon her autonomy as a human being, to presume that as a woman she's better capable of taking care of this 7-year-old girl. Now, I want you to contrast that idea to the second Aliens movie. Do you remember that? I don't know if you saw the Aliens franchise, but the first one is Alien. The second one is Aliens. And that's when the female character, I'm just digging for her name right now. Amy's going to help me. Sigourney Weaver, whatever her character is, but there's a young girl there, and she's the mom fighting against the alien to protect the little girl. Well, that's perfectly in character. It makes all kinds of sense. But that movie is like 30 years old. Now you've got women offended that you would think the woman would want to protect the child, when that's actually the nature of women. Isn't that crazy? Ripley. Ripley is the character's name. She does a great job. I like the whole franchise, but this one especially, this is the single mom character kind of motif that you see playing out in this Aliens, I think, is the second movie of the franchise, Aliens, because there's a bunch of them, not just one. And she's protecting the baby with a vengeance. She's protecting the little girl. And all that maternal energy is coming out in a very motherly, maternal way. But she's tough. Ripley's tough, but she's a tough mom. And so I think there's a complete consistency there with the thing we're talking about, the way she's made. She can be tough. She can fight like crazy, but she's fighting as a mom. She's not just fighting as a parent. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I think where it gets difficult, Mr. Koukl, is there's now so much stigma surrounding these issues that it makes it very difficult to talk about, especially among people my age.
Yeah.
It's almost like you bring it up, and it's like you yelled fire in a movie theater.
Yeah, I get it. Well, why? I wonder. I'm prone to ask questions, though, but I'd want to ask: do you think it's okay for a man to punch a woman in the face?
Oh no. Well,
Oh, wait a minute. That's what happened at the Olympics.
Right.
So why is that okay? Because the man punching the woman calls himself a girl, that he can then punch a woman in the face. That's a question. It's a fair question to ask somebody on the other side. Well, if he thinks he's a girl, then he is a girl. Well, wait a minute. But he's a male punching a female. That doesn't change with his mental attitude. Just because his own personal belief changes doesn't mean it changes the act of a man punching a woman in the face. So I don't know what they're going to say to that. But it's if they cling to their fantasy or their delusion, it becomes more and more foolish sounding, it seems to me, when you ask these kinds of questions.
Sure. Yeah. I would love to talk to you more about this some other time as well, Mr. Koukl.
Sure. Well, we can pursue it again. I got to take a break here, and then. But it's great talking to you again. Sorry I missed you at the Minneapolis Reality. We had same thing as usual, almost 4,000 people there. It was a great event, and let's see if you are eventually moving to Portland, right?
To Southern Oregon, not.
Oh,
Portland.
Southern Oregon. Well, that's still now it's a longer reach to Seattle, but Seattle's still somewhat within striking distance if you want to go to an event. But probably if you got to fly to Seattle, you might as well just fly to Minneapolis, That's bigger as long as you got to get on a plane. So anyway, it's great talking to you, Cade.
You as well, Mr. Koukl. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Give my best to your folks and to your brothers. And do you have a sister? I can't remember.
Yes, youngest sister.
Okay, and you all you boys are going to protect her, right?
We certainly will.
Attaboy. Okay, good talking to you, Cade.
All right, thanks, Mr. Koukl. Take care.
Sure, bye. Let's go to break, and then we'll come back with another open mic question here on Stand to Reason. All right, we got like 10 minutes left, 9.5 here for this segment. Let's see if we can get a couple of quick open mic calls in. This is Cody. Cody, what's on your mind?
Hello, my name is Cody Drummond. I am a contractor in California. We build swimming pools and water features. Recently, I've had someone request that we build a large water feature for a Buddhist temple in which there will be a Buddhist statue sitting in the center of the reflection pool. And the temple site's pretty large, so there will be a lot of, I would imagine, pagan activities going on there and Buddhist worship type activities. So I've already turned down the project, but I'm very curious to get Greg's thoughts on whether he thinks I've made the right decision here, or whether he thinks would be a reason to participate in the construction of a project like this.
Mm-hmm.
Really appreciate your guys' show and opinion, and would love to hear what you have to say about this. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Cody. I don't think it's wrong to turn it down. I think it's certainly within your prerogative to say no to virtually any project that you're offered for any reason. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it. So there is no wrong in turning it down. The question is whether there would be a wrong in doing it. And I'm not entirely sure under the circumstances. Let's just say you weren't building a pool, you were building a sidewalk. The sidewalk that takes you right up to the temple. You're pouring concrete. Now, that seems like innocuous to me. Of course, you can build a sidewalk. You're not controlling who's going to walk on it, and maybe people are going to walk on that sidewalk to go into a temple. But it doesn't strike me as contributing to the temple worship, which would be a pagan worship, that you built the sidewalk that leads up to the temple. Maybe the reflection pool falls into the similar category. Of course, at some point, you could say, well, what if we're not building the sidewalk, we're building the foundation and the building itself and the platform upon which the pagan idol sits? Well, that seems different. And sometimes in these kinds of things, there's just for lack of a better word, a seeming to it. It just feels like this wouldn't be good for me. Apparently that was the case for you, Cody, because you turned the job down. And I can understand that entirely. You'd be thinking, you know what? I don't want to have anything to do with building any aspect of a pagan temple, even if it's a sidewalk that's on the grounds of the pagan temple. I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to get close to it. That would be the safe thing to do, actually. So there's no possible complicity that you have with something that is untoward, spiritually untoward. Now, whether you are morally obliged to turn it down, that's another question, and that would be kind of a matter, I guess it kind of depends. You played it safe after a fashion by just saying, no, I'm not even going there. And sometimes there's wisdom in that. Now, if it turned out that this is the only job you're offered and your family is starving, well, then the question would be, is it immoral for me to build the pool? And, of course, if it would be immoral and you were clear on that, then you can't do it just to feed your family. I would think that this is where you trust God to provide for your family in a different way, but that's not the circumstance you're facing. Sometimes there's not a clear-cut answer to questions like these. To me, like a same-sex wedding cake is different. That's an active complicity in the celebration of a same-sex wedding by baking the cake. What if you were renting chairs for the event? Oh, I don't know, maybe that's not quite as clear. Sometimes there's going to be gray. But if it's gray and you're uncomfortable, it's better not to go there at all. If it's gray in your own mind and you're uncomfortable with it, then just don't even go there. And that seems to me like the choice that you've made, Cody. There isn't always a clear-cut answer to some of these questions. And so it's probably safest to err on the side of being safe, being conservative in issues like this. So I support your decision to turn down the request to build that water feature in the Buddhist temple. Tracy has a question here about interpreting Scripture. Let's hear what she has to say. Tracy?
Hi, Greg. I'm wondering if you can offer some clarity on when to interpret passages as prescriptive versus descriptive. I'm just thinking of some of the cultural questions, for example, of women wearing head coverings. Why do women in churches today not typically wear head coverings, at least in most churches, but many conservative churches still will not allow women to be the preaching pastor, for example. I have thoughts on this, but when I try to sort of articulate them, I find that I get a little bit muddy in my thinking, and I just don't know how to parse that out and would appreciate some clarity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Tracy. There's a lot going on in your question, a lot of different categories of things, okay? First, the distinction between descriptive and prescriptive, okay? In descriptive, it seems pretty straightforward. You're merely describing what took place. With prescriptive, you are saying what ought to have taken place. So prescriptive entails a moral injunction. Descriptive is merely reporting. So when we go back to the Old Testament, sometimes we have to make this distinction. Well, kings and different players in the Old Testament had more than one wife. So why is polygamy wrong? Well, there, the question is whether this is a descriptive element of the Old Testament or a prescriptive. The answer is that the text is describing what those guys did, but they are not saying that that's the right thing to do. So the way you distinguish between descriptive and prescriptive is you look at the context and the passage and see, are they just describing the event, or are they affirming it? Is the writer affirming it, celebrating it, or commanding it? Okay. Now, sometimes that's not always an easy distinction to make, but that there is a distinction is the first step to figuring out which is which. All right. You also mentioned about head coverings. Now, in this case, in the New Testament, this isn't a matter of descriptive versus prescriptive. Whatever command was entailed by Paul and what durability there is to that command regarding head coverings, that definitely was a prescriptive circumstance. He's saying, this is what I'm saying should happen in the churches. Now, is that for in perpetuity, for all churches for all time, or is that for a unique set of circumstances? That's a different question. That's an interpretive question, and I'm not actually capable of answering that. That's a harder one. But it is as given to the people it's spoken to. That is prescriptive because it is a directive. And you also brought up the issue of preaching pastor. Now, that's another element that is a question of prescriptive, not just descriptive. Is it okay for a woman to be a preaching pastor? And one has to go to the text to determine that. Now, some people go to 1 Timothy chapter 2, and, I don't allow a woman to preach or to teach and exercise authority over a man, and then they say, well, that applies to women preaching as pastors, and therefore they nix that. I don't actually think that's what's going on there. I think women preaching is okay as long as they're not elders, which is in chapter 3. In either case, though, however you understand that role, that is a prescriptive element. That is an ought kind of thing, all right? And if it turns out that there are women that were preachers that Paul approved of in the New Testament, that would give you a hint as to what is appropriate. But the issue is a bit complicated. So I'm just going to let it lie at that. Thank you so much for your question, Tracy, and for you guys for listening. Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason. Give them heaven. Bye-bye now.